Hello, I'm Larry Johnson, and this is Countercurrents. And today I'm bringing back my good friend Alastair Crooke. Alastair is the preeminent analyst with respect to what's going on in West Asia and whether or not we can avoid a war. Is Donald Trump intent on going to war with Iran? And can Israel, with all of its internal divisions, can it actually handle a war at this time? Thanks for watching. Hit the like and subscribe button. And here we go. Okay. Yeah, we're just talking about the power of Alistair's British accent. He woos the world. So,
some of it.
We're in a mess. Let's start with the internal divisions within Israel. You've written extensively on that and insightfully. Is this going to spur them on, spur Bibi on to doing something crazy, or is it going to hinder his ability?
Well, I mean, there are two parts of it. First of all, the Israeli press, the Hebrew press anyway, are saying very clearly that Israel believed it had an agreement from Washington. We're just waiting for the green light, and it was already accepted to do a week of attacks on Iran on the nuclear program, starting in May, and that this was all set up. And Kurila had been in Tel Aviv in the Carrier, that's the MOD, the Ministry of Defense there, in the dungeon, in the basement, in the bunker, to plan everything.
Just to clarify, Kurila is the head of Central Command for the U.S. military.
Sorry. Yes, that's correct. Yeah, that's who it was. And he was down in the bunker coordinating a little while ago. And so the Israelis say it was all set up and organized, and they got pretty clear indications that the green light was coming, and that it wasn't. As we saw, there were sort of divisions within the Trump team. And then it was put on hold, and then it was changed again, as you probably saw. I think you did see with the about face by Witkoff when he changed from saying that his mission was to get a cap on enrichment, and now that had changed to being the elimination of all enrichment and the Iranian weapon systems, missile systems, something which was very different from what we thought last Saturday. Hugely different. A few words make a world of difference.
Yes.
And those few words really changed everything. And unless Trump has another change of heart, puts us on a path to war with Iran, there's no doubt. I mean, there's no question that Iran would accept either to sort of the humiliation of dismantling its centrifuges and handing them over to America or the IEA in some way, and then or see them blown up. For 20 years, they built a conventional defense because they didn't have a nuclear, and because it was banned for them to use a nuclear one. So they built a conventional defense of missiles. And there are missile cities deeply buried, and there are other things which I can come to later. But this was all prepared. Now, you asked about Israel and start off there. I mean, Israel is now bitterly divided. Bitterly, it has been throughout. According to a poll in the Maariv Hebrew newspaper, 60% of Israelis think civil war is inevitable. So the divisions are deep. On one side, there is what they call the deep state, which is basically, I'm now being very loose with this, but it's basically the Ashkenazi and the Supreme Court and the sort of technocratic part of Israel against the sort of settler national religious part. So I call it the Kingdom of Judea, the religious, because that's what they believe they're establishing, versus the state of Israel. Mm-hmm. So the profound schism and the sort of internecine war going on, the sacking of the head of Shin Bet. What I need to say for your listeners is you will have heard this has all gone to the Supreme Court in Israel. But the Supreme Court isn't like your Supreme Court in America. It's quite different. There isn't a constitution. There's nothing by which, if you like, the Supreme Court can make the sort of final litmus test. There are just basic laws. And some of them are not so clear, and some of them are rather opaque. And so the question of who has the right to sack the head of the security service, the Shin Bet, Ronan Bar, the Supreme Court says that the Prime Minister shouldn't have done it. Minister of Justice says, that's nonsense, you're talking out of your hat. Of course he can be sacked by the Prime Minister, that's what the law says. So it's like that. There's no sort of clarity, and there's no sort of, final verdict. And quite likely, if they come up with a judgment, then they will ignore it. Let me just go back, because a little bit of background, which might help make this clearer to your listeners, is that there has been what is called the judicial reform for some time. And it's very controversial. They want to change in the system, because some years ago, the Constitutional Court, took unto itself, as I say, there's no constitution. They took on themselves the right to review legislation passed by the government. And the government said, no, thank you. We are the government. We've been elected to do a job. I mean, who are you to decide what can be? Echoes of what is going on in America must be obvious to listeners about the same discussion taking place. That's why it's called, on one side, the deep state, the judicial process, and on the other side, it is called, if you like, the revolution they are trying to launch. And the point really was that when you look at if you like, the judicial process. And again, the judicial process, rather like in America, was used for sort of political purposes, leaking prosecutions, politicizing parts of the police, which are now being pulled back to the other side. But a key thing to understand is the mainstream, which was, but is no more, was basically of liberal European Jews, Ashkenazi by background. Now, if you looked at the Supreme Court on the time that the other side won, there are 14 judges on it. Or was it 15? 15, I think. 14 of those are Ashkenazi, and one is Mizrahi.
Okay.
This is what the fight was about. And the Mizrahi, who are the Jews that come from North Africa and the Middle East, regard themselves as being much more Judaic. And so when they came into office, they put down a radical program of restoring Jewish law, halakha, in Israel, and if you like, the erection of the third temple on Al-Aqsa, getting rid of Al-Aqsa Mosque, and establishing Israel on the land of Israel being code for Greater Israel. So it was a very radical group, and the if you like, the European liberal wing of Israel, which is now in a minority just about, and is largely secular, really didn't like the idea of it becoming, as they said, an explicitly religious society and structure. So these are the sort of, just to give you a sort of a little grasp of the divisions that are there. And so the army is divided, and you have a lot of the army who are settlers. They come from the West Bank, or they come from settlements. And these are radical, and they have a radical support of 100+ rabbi who support them completely in what they say is the necessity to complete the process of establishing the land of Israel. And so they are on one side. And since this government came in, many of these settlers have joined militias. And so really Ben-Gvir, who is now Minister for Internal Security, commands a phalanx of police, which are loyal to him, and about 10,000 armed settlers. So he has really almost an army. that he can use. So those are the divisions, bitterly divided on just about everything. And I would probably say you have Netanyahu, who is clearly ill, clearly fading, looking quite elderly now. It's really only thing holding it together is basically the United States and Trump.
Well, it is Netanyahu rumored to have prostate cancer, and that's probably not in remission.
Oh, no, that's definite. I mean, there's no doubt he had prostate cancer. But the thing that is much more in question is about a year ago, he had a pacemaker put into his heart. And he has to travel with a doctor, or if not two doctors, always. And there are times when, sorry, there's a bit of a noise going by.
I can't hear it.
There are times when, you know, he has to just stop everything and go to his doctor. He says explicitly that he could be, you know, he's within a sort of hour or two, if he doesn't get medical help, of dying. So he's quite seriously ill. Now, is there anyone to replace him?
This is going to be my next question. Yeah.
No, there is no one. And, you know, like him or loathe Netanyahu, I mean, there's no one that touches him in his knowledge of America, his ability to manipulate and to manage the American political system. He has a real touch in that. Of course, he was brought up in America. He knows it intimately. He went to university in America. So he has and he knows how to speak American, not just English.
Yeah.
And so there's no one of that sort waiting in the wings. And the if you like, the messianic element of this government, which is a majority now, it has accumulated power and is now a majority, and they are not going to give up power. They've been waiting all these years to take power. They were blocked several times by machinations within the Knesset. There are a number of seats that are held by Arabs. I mean, they're not much admired within the Palestinian community, but those are Arab MKs, and they have been used pretty obviously to sort of block the Mizrahi taking power. Mizrahi were in from the beginning of the state. They were a part of the first sort of military organization, and then they were incorporated. Begin brought them into the Likud, and they became part of the sort of the structure of Likud. So they're very much in the mainstream, and this is the fundamental fight: is Israel to be a modern, secular, Western, liberal state, as I think most Americans and Europeans think it is,
right?
Or alternatively, is it going to be a more messianic state, which looks to the Torah and the Talmud and is guided and becomes, if you like, a theosophy state? So it's a pretty fundamental schism. And that's why people, are so at odds with one another. Anyway, so all of this.
Let me just comment that the irony here is Iran is portrayed as this crazed fundamentalist religious nation, and yet Israel is in the process of becoming the very thing that they claim that they're trying to stop, and in a more dangerous form. Because I think we could make the case that Iran, despite the rule of the mullahs, they're not insane. They are not apocalyptical.
Listen, it's much worse than that. Much, much worse than that. Because on the one hand, you have, if you like, which, the West is aware of, the sort of constitutional court and the judges and that. But on the other hand, you have some of these rabbis, which are Kahanists. Yes. Kahan was the man who committed an act in the synagogue to blow it up, and who are believers that all the Palestinians have Amalek. And these are the people I mean, I've seen pictures of, one of the rabbis, blessing a soldier who'd raped a Palestinian prisoner. And he said, no, that was fine. What you were doing, you were right. These are not Jews. They're Goyim. There's no problem with, I mean, it is much knowing both places, Iran and Israel. Israel, that part of it, not the Ashkenazi part, but that part of it is much more radically theological, messianic, whereas Iran is much less so. And I do know, in the sense that I used to go down to Qom and talk to the religious leaders and the philosophers down at Qom. So I have a sort of sense of what they're like. So it is a paradox, as you rightly note.
Yeah. So this, I don't know if you saw the New York Times piece came out yesterday.
Yeah. And I saw your piece on it.
Okay.
Read that too.
Yeah. The part that alarmed me was, buried down in the article was this fiction about what happened in Iran's strikes in April in retaliation for Israel's attacks, and then their Iran's subsequent strikes, 1st of October of 2024. Is it your sense that the Israelis genuinely believe that they have knocked out Iranian air defense, and that Iranian missiles are incapable of penetrating and hitting Israel? Do they really believe that?
Of course not. Of course not. This is known as Hasbara. This is propaganda and moving it on. But I was going to say, I mean, this is a really serious. We've just been talking about internal problems within Israel, but this is quite a serious problem within the West. Is that there are some, deep assumptions. One of which is, there isn't really any more wars as we used to know them.
Right.
This is you in America. That all we need is a sort of judicious application of force in limited or less limited quantities. And secondly, as part of that, is the extent and duration of that war is determined solely by Washington and perhaps its puppy dogs in London. But no one else is involved in the decision of launching it or ending that war. And then there is this deep sort of assumption, which you hear reflected in Kellogg, is that, that really only if, and I think you mentioned it in your article, that Russia is incapable of coming to any agreement unless first it is defeated or suffered an extreme slapdown. But there is another factor, and I've just written a piece on Substack about this, really, another factor, which is that and you'll be aware of it, within the sort of foreign policy beltway community, it's a very introverted sort of struggle between certain NGOs and certain individuals to become, who are going to get the most patronage and support and financial support and political support, because many of them have political ambitions. And that these individuals and NGOs are fighting amongst themselves basically for position within the US domestic sphere. It's not necessary, therefore, for them to know about Iran or to know the details of Iranian culture or anything else, because all of this is really a struggle within a strictly a perimeter of discussion, which is set by the foreign policy elites, and that people who go outside it are ignored, and sometimes reality is ignored.
Tell me about it
as well. And then reality is ignored too. So we have that. So you can set yourself up as an Iran expert without knowing anything, because you've actually said the right language in the right way at the right think tanks. And then you're an Iran expert, and you're only sort of being contested by other Iran experts who are within the accepted limits of discourse. And those accepted limits of discourse, of course, is that Iran, threatens Israel, is a theological state, and that it
number one sponsor of terrorism.
Yeah,
which exactly. is a complete lie.
I know you've you did good work on researching all of that, Larry. Congratulations on that. It's good that someone does that. It's very rare.
Yeah, it's shocking.
It does put you outside the magic circle. You're outside of that perimeter. But that's the other part of it. I mean, this is, and I end the article quoting about the Bosnia war, where it was really an internal fight between certain NGOs and certain human rights, all American, inside the sort of perimeter of American sort of discourse. And, none of them really had any knowledge about the Balkans or Serbia or anything very much at all. A few things would come in from Wall Street Journal or the New York Times, just as you've seen now coming in. So we have this, and just to say categorically, because you did ask the question at the beginning, and I'm sorry, this has been a circular way of getting to.
No.
Of course, the Israelis know, but of course, then they've got a narrative they want to push. We have something to sell, which is, they believe, if America comes and does it, America will do it and achieve it. I don't believe that, actually, but they believe strongly in the sort of, the exceptionalism of America and the magnificence of its armed forces and its technological achievements. I don't. And I think anyone who's followed Ukraine for a while, comes to a certain skepticism, but there's a real reason for skepticism. Because I follow very closely what happened in those attacks in April. I say again, the Israeli aircraft never came closer than 70 to 100 kilometers from Iranian airspace. They weren't able to penetrate. And I know that at the time, because we were following some of the if you like, the channels, the local internal channels.
Right.
And they suddenly started saying, what's happened? There's a message in from the commander and said, we suddenly encountered, we're being targeted by radar we knew nothing about. That's 70 kilometers outside of the airspace. And eventually it was called off because this was supposed to be the strike which would eliminate the air defenses. And then another strike afterwards was the F-35s, which would sort of bomb certain targets. So there was no damage to missile facilities. There was nothing done. They claimed that there was a damage done to this research center. I used to be involved with Iran because I was part of Solana's team at that time. And so I was sent to Iran and I talked to them. And, we were going through that place, endlessly. The Israelis said, they found some sort of traces of uranium in the sand. There might be a secret cellar somewhere under this establishment where the bomb is being made. IAEA searched it once. The IAEA came back and searched it a second time. I mean, it wasn't. And I had friends who were watching this during the night. And, if a big ballistic missile goes off in Tehran or near Tehran, I mean, you can see it because it's up in the hills. And there was then the talk that they damaged this sort of fuel base in the east of Iran. And I was quite lucky, but I got someone who had actually watched the whole process. Their house was on one side, and they could see across the area. And they said it was really interesting for what they said. They said, we saw about, I can't remember the exact number, but 6 or 8 of these inward coming vehicles. They didn't do much damage. They just, landed on a broken rooftop and exploded, but they weren't ballistic missiles at all. And they said, but what really surprised me, what I don't understand, was these were coming not from the side of Iraq, from Tehran's side. They were coming from the north. They were all coming from the north. They were coming, in other words, from the Caspian. And so what was going on was a little play where a few drones were being sent and fired off from the Caspian onto these abandoned buildings, which they sort of blew up. Drones don't have 4 kilograms of explosive or something. They're not really very powerful. And so, and this was presented by Israel. We destroyed where they put their fuel together, the solid fuel manufactory and all of this. And what it amounted to was, a disinformation effort by sending a few drones across. And it was the same in that research establishment near Tehran. There was no real damage done. So how good is the air defenses? Well, I can't tell you, but they certainly have them, and in great depth. And what I think was so worrying for the Israelis was that clearly the F-35s, which is supposed to be stealth aircraft, were having lock-on radar. Mm-hmm. That's when the targeting radar locks on to you as a target. So that's why they canceled the operation and came home.
Yeah, one of there's video evidence. I don't remember this kid's name, but an American that he's been hanging out in the Middle East. He's just a tourist. He's not a political type at all. And he was doing his journey through Iran, and happened to be in Tehran on October 27th of 2024 when the Israeli attack took place. And he was recording. He's just commenting. He says, "Wow, man, I was in the midst of this," and he's recording from out of his hotel window. You can see incoming missiles getting shot down. And again, he wasn't there to propagandize one way or the other. It was just like, hey, this is what I saw. What worries me is that here in the United States, within the political leadership on both sides, Republican and Democrat, they genuinely believe this nonsense that Iran's air defense system was destroyed, and that it's just man, all we got to do is just go in there and bomb them. And they're not even paying attention to what they can't accomplish in Yemen. I mean, it is
there's no connection.
Yeah, complete disconnect
with what's really. I mean, I don't know. I was trying to allude to that when I was saying there are these sort of assumptions which are, and the whole discussion in the Beltway is so carefully manipulated and managed by certain interests, whether they're Gulf interests or military industrial complex interests. It's a highly managed discourse, and they say the things that are good for your career and which will attract patronage and money and for your NGO or for whatever else it is. But saying the reality, no, it doesn't do you much good in that context. So, I mean, I think there is this problem. I mean, it is seen, look, we've got the B-2s. We'll just send them from Diego Garcia. They'll go bomb, and we'll do this for a week, and it'll be all over. And Iran will be like Syria. It'll be just open. We'll just walk in. There'll be no one there minding the shop. We can take it over. And we will not only take it over, but we'll have all the oil and gas too, because that's a big part of this, of course, is China. And to make sure that China can be brought under control by controlling Iranian oil supply to China, because they are quite dependent on Iranian. They are vulnerable on the energy supply side, the Chinese. So I think that this is how is the background, and so that's why we've had this about turn by Witkoff, which is very, very striking, because he strikes me as a man. I know you've sort of thought about him a lot, but he strikes me, he's highly intelligent. He's smart in that other way.
Right.
He's smart. He doesn't know the region, and he doesn't know, and he has a great liability because, all these things like the nuclear talks are immensely complicated. They've been going on for 20 years or so. I mean, there's such a history. Look, maybe sometimes it's best if you can sort of stand away from history and sort of look at things with fresh eyes. Up to a point, that's possible. But at the same time, you can't, we're dealing with real politics here, not something sort of abstract.
Well, let me ask you, because he sounded to the average American listening to him. They said, "Boy, he's smart. He knows what he's talking about." And they say, "Yeah, we can. Iran doesn't need more than 3.7% or 3.8% enrichment. They don't need 20%." And it's like, right there, you knew that he didn't even understand the role of the 20% enrichment process with respect to medical isotopes. And I don't. Did you have any experience with that part of the Iranian nuclear program?
Well, I didn't go to the research reactor, but that was always part of the discussion. But the enrichment that took place, it's very important people understand what happened, why it was at 60% enrichment, was because effectively, when Trump withdrew from the JCPOA, he reinstated American sanctions on Iran as part of withdrawal from the JCPOA. And these were not, therefore, UN sanctions. They were not, because it wasn't snapback, which would mean a mandatory application by all UN members to the process. These were American sanctions and secondary sanctions. And I remember at the time, because the JCP provided for the ability of Iran to trade normally, to be able to act, within the limits, not on weapons and things like this, but they're able to do ordinary trade with the rest of the world, even if America was now sanctioning them. Under the JCPOA, that was fine because they were not in breach of it or anything like that. And, and Iran was expecting to be able to do, business with Europe if they couldn't do business with America. And what happened was, because I went around some of the banks at that time, because I was following up on this, London banks, and went and had lunch at their boardroom. And they said, "Listen, Alistair, let me tell you what's going on. Simply, every one of us has had a little visit from a Treasury official recently. It's come to lunch, and they've said, Iran, don't do business with Iran. We've been putting a lot of fines on banks for technical breaches, money laundering, things like that. You wouldn't want a big fine like that, would you?" And they said, "No, we don't." And so Iran wanted to put pressure back to have some negotiating leverage. So that's the point at which they started increasing the enrichment level. I mean, they had it to 20% because they did use that for the research reactor. But even that is not, absolutely existential. But the concept, but the philosophy, but the ideology of Iran having, as it is, it's right under the NPT to have, if you like, nuclear energy for powering an industrial production. That is their right, and that's what they intend to stick with. The 60% had nothing to do with them going to a weapon. That was nonsense. I mean, of course they could move to a weapon at some point, or to even to 90% enrichment. Some of the more advanced centrifuges, which are under Fordo, which are deeply buried under a mountain, I don't suppose it would take too long for them to get up to 90%. But I mean, the fact that they were going to 60% was to put leverage on the Europeans and the others and say, look, you're not sticking to the JCPOA. You ask us to stay within it, and you won't stay within it yourself. You're breaking it throughout. This was during the Obama time by then. And they said it was, you were breaking it. And so they had, there are many sort of complaints on both sides of, people not staying to the laws or breaking the rules. And so they needed leverage. And so they took leverage by increasing the enrichment level. But it was, to my knowledge, never likely to end up as a, at that stage as a weapons. Who knows now in the future if, the supreme leader, there's an element of, you have to understand one thing that is important is in Shia law, in the law in Shiism, Sharia, there is a provision called ijtihad, which is not accepted by Sunnis. They have the doors of ijtihad are closed. Ijtihad means that you can, by reason and time and circumstances, change the law to meet the new circumstances. It's actually quite a sensible, practical thing to have. The gates of Ijtihad were closed in about 1400 for the Sunnis. So the Sharia is the Sharia, etc. Whereas for the Shia, you can, if circumstances, time, and situation changes, and you have a rational case for it, rational, by the way, case for this, then you can change even basic laws, such as, whether a woman can marry again once her husband has died or something like that. All that can be changed at a certain point. But it can only be changed by a senior cleric. You have to be a Hujjat al-Islam, at least, or a mujtahid, to be able to sort of change the laws in that way. So it's possible they could change the law and accept, to move to a nuclear weapon. It's not, it's not written in stone or anything like that.
Well, let's let we've got the second round of talks. I think we're both on the same page going into this last round. That either, they could go in and they'd come out and say, "There's no agreement. We can't talk, and war would be inevitable," or they'd find some way to say, "Okay, yeah, let's." The ideal solution would have been for at the end of that first day of meetings that Witkoff came out and said, "This has been so productive. We're going to stay tomorrow. And we're going to continue talking." That would have been great. So we got the middle ground where, as you pointed out, he initially came back and said, "Yeah, we're talking caps basically." Now it's been the Volte-Face. It looks like the Zionist crew, as I anticipated, was going to come down heavy on him. And so it's setting up for this meeting in Rome on Saturday.
I think it's not going to be any longer in Rome. I think it's going back to Oman. Okay. Apparently, Vance is coming here on the weekend. And for some obscure reason, they say the two things can't, Rome being such a tiny place that they might sort of bump into each other and this would be awkward. I don't know. But anyway, so they said not in Rome, back in Oman. So I don't know, but that was the American side who said, well, Vance is going to be in Rome that day. And so it's not a good idea if the talks were going on in another location.
Sort of weird.
Anyway.
Because Maloney is, I understand she's in the United States today, meeting on Thursday, meeting with Trump. So I don't know who answered, seeing.
I mean, look, Italy is not hostile territory for Vance or for Witkoff or difficult. You can do pretty well what you like. I mean, within reason. But Rome is not a complicated place where politics is going to make things. So I don't know why. But I want to come back to something you've just said, and you said about the two sides. Let's go to Trump. Because this is really important in my view. I mean, because really, at the end of the day, this comes down to your judgment about who Trump is.
Right. And
what is he? Now, what I mean by that is Trump has been consistent. I think it was Rubio or the other day who was saying, he's been steadfast about being steadfast. And he has about this. I went back and looked at his speeches after he walked out in 2018. And what did he walk out about? I mean, he said the usual boilerplate, oh, well, this is heading towards inevitably Iran will get to a nuclear weapon. Now, this was the position, an old American position that came from RAND organization for a long time, and which was that any enrichment potentially could lead to weaponization. It was held very strongly by RAND, and it was only the breaking of that injunction that enabled the JCPOA to come into being. But that was the original, if you like, underlying assumption. And then so he said, well, it could do it. But what were his main complaints? They were two. He was very vociferous about it. One was their missile system, their conventional defense system, which he said has got to go. And then the other thing was what he called, I mean, I don't know can't recall exactly the word, but the Iranian proxies, the Hamas, Hezbollah, other proxies. And he said, that's got to stop. These have got to be disarmed and disabled. That was back in 2018. Then on the 4th of February, then he issued this national presidential memorandum, which is a legally binding finding on all branches of the US government. And it was, first of all, there were 7 elements to that. And this was just 4th of February, just a little bit more than a month ago. Iran should be denied a nuclear weapon, denied intercontinental missiles, denied 2 other asymmetric and conventional weapons capabilities. And to this end, the NSPM directs maximum economic pressure be imposed, that the Treasury Act to drive Iran's oil exports to 0, that the US work to trigger JCPOA snapback of sanctions, which they're doing. The E3 have said that they're going to do this in June. They've informed Iran that they're going to trigger snapback in June, and that Iran's malign influence abroad be neutralized. Now, that was what he signed and put into a legal context on the 4th of February, Trump. And so, my question comes back to it. I don't understand, and I've not heard of a really clear explanation, why Trump seems so beholden to the Israeli interests of Israel, but the Israeli interests of Americans. They seem to have him on a leash, in some respects. And I don't know if there was some Faustian bargain agreed. But this is the question that I put to you. When people say, "Oh, but I think he really just wants to he's a man of peace. He wants to find a negotiated outcome." That doesn't sound like that to me.
Yeah, no,
I mean,
you're right.
This sounds maximalist and designed to mean that no agreement is going to be forthcoming. And this wasn't 20 years ago. This was just a month or so ago. He put all these down. Now, was that just bluster? It's possible. But at the same time, it was really very difficult to start talks on that. And quite clearly, Witkoff didn't go on that line. He went on the line about capping enrichment levels, which the Iranians are happy to talk about and to come up with some counter proposals.
Yeah, he said
so that was.
Well, I was just going to say, he's had a relationship in New York City throughout his years in business, is my understanding, with the whole Chabad community, the Lubavitchers in particular. So, there is an element in which I think he is he's a captive of the Zionists. And
it seems so.
The other concerning part, and I've got this directly from someone who's, let's say, had extensive dealings with him, multiple meetings. Trump is not a critical thinker. He's not someone sitting, thinking through, okay, I like a chess player. I've got to make this move, and the other side's going to make this move, and because I want to move him into this direction. He's much more emotional, and coupled with some insecurity that he doesn't really relish having people smarter than him in the room, and so it's dangerous. And now we're seeing, I know Ray McGovern and I disagree on this. He's very optimistic that this thing with Witkoff, it's moving in the right direction. I think it's going off the rails, and it will go off the rails come Saturday, whether they're in Rome or Oman. That.
Unless Trump or Witkoff, I mean, this wasn't just a sort of casual comment. This was written on his official, Twitter site. So it's written in very clear English that they must, that they have to eliminate enrichment zone, right, and weapons. Yeah, and have them inspected. And he said earlier that they will have to be inspected, and also inspected for trigger mechanisms. I mean, this doesn't sound to me like something that is really going to come to some sort of quick conclusion that Trump wants, and especially with Witkoff's about face on the 2 key things that Iran have always said are just not negotiable. That they have an enrichment process and that they have their conventional defense. Otherwise, they're neutered. They're naked. They're simply, humiliated. And probably, yes, then, the Iranian state would be under threat.
Well, one thing I've been emphasizing, and I appreciate your critique if I'm off base, but the signing of the Comprehensive Security Agreement between Russia and Iran that took place on 17th January. I think that was significant because it gave Iran some reassurance now that whatever doubts it had previously about could they rely upon Russia, particularly in the wake of the debacle in Syria, that this put Russia firmly in their camp. Then we come to March. The first week and a half of March, you get Russia, Iran, and China conducting that joint naval exercise. Then after the end of that military exercise, you get the first meeting of the foreign ministers or their senior officials in, excuse me, I'm going to sneeze here. You get the first meeting in Beijing between Iran, China, and Russia. Then that was followed up with the meeting last week, a week ago Tuesday, in Moscow, the same three, where they're talking about Iran's dealings with the United States and this unfolding. I think the West has dramatically underestimated the importance of what Russia and China are doing with Iran. That they're not just superficial contacts. What's your view?
I'm a little bit different in the sense that, clearly there is really close coordination taking place, China, Russia, and Iran, about everything, because the Chinese, when they came back so quickly with tariffs on the United States, this has been thought about, it has been worked out. The Chinese put out a statement. In fact, the CCP put out a statement saying this was expected, this was planned for, we were ready for it, and they did it. Bam. Mm-hmm. This is our response. That was coordinated. You remember there was a 90-minute call with Putin about 2 months ago or something like that. And the main discussion, we don't know any details about it, but the main discussion seems to have been really that America would try and put a wedge between Russia and China, and how do we stop it?
Right.
And also probably a discussion about America will try and use, if you like, its position to put a wedge or to put leverage on Iran through Russia, and how do we manage that? Now, having said that, having talked to many Russians about Syria and the backdrop to Syria and so on, I just think there's one thing that it needs to be clear, and I think this is right. If it's not right, you can say so, but I think it is. The Russians say to me, listen, when it comes to the Middle East, to Syria and other things, we are here fighting the whole of NATO.
Right.
This is our prime interest. This is what we're all about. It's very unlikely we're going to, unless, the situation becomes in extremis. But, we have our hands full fighting, whatever number of countries that are lined up in NATO against us. And so we're not looking and don't think that we're going to sort of intervene in Syria or Iran easily. Yeah, they'll provide air defenses, equipment, perhaps specialists, training. I'm sure that's happening. Mm-hmm. There's no doubt of it. But would they intervene militarily? They will only take that decision at the time and in the circumstances that transpire, because one thing is quite clear. I've been involved in sort of conflicts over many, many years, and my whole experience is that whatever one says about how the war will go, whatever war we're talking about, it dissolves within 24 hours.
Yes,
it's gone.
Fully agree.
And it's
fully agree.
All changed. And so I think the Russians will watch it very carefully. They have a good relationship, but much of that agreement was about, the underlying things. Why is Iran so important to Russia? Because it sits on the north-south corridor.
That's it.
It sits on the east-west corridor. And also Iran has a security contact for the whole of the stans, Central Asia, who are complex political structures. Russia and China need its experience there to keep security, because this is the area of the Belt and Road. This is the future growth of the global economy, lies in Asia, which is just on the cusp of a major step up in its sort of industrialization, and like in right up to Siberia, where it is just humming with new activity, new businesses, and everything up there. So Iran, it's not that they're being nice to Iran. It's their interest,
absolutely,
Iranian interest to keep this going. But I think they will first of all see if Iran can handle it itself, and it might well be able to handle it itself without help from outside, because they have been preparing for this war for 20 years, and so I think they may well first of all see if Iran can deal with it, and it might well be able to deal with it. I don't know what sort of and if I did know, I wouldn't be saying, but they obviously have. They have 3 different air defense systems. Let's just leave it at that.
Yeah,
and they have some and the over horizon radars that Iran has, they made. And they are the result of their own work. They're not brought in from Russia or China. So, it's wrong to think of Iran as a sort of, not really up there in the first rank in terms of technology. Out of the 10 leading sort of engineering institutions in the world, I think about 6 are in Iran. I mean, they are in engineering and technology. They are, that's why Russia gets its drones from Iran, and China does research projects jointly there. So I would guess they'll probably sort of see if Iran can manage it alone. Now, that will depend a lot on whether Israel is weaker than even we think it to be, or if it turns out that it's stronger, and if America has got more capabilities than are expected. None of us know those answers. But I think that the Iranians, my sense of it, don't get put off. I think that, this line, oh, well, we could do a deal, it wouldn't take much to do a deal. I think there's deep skepticism inside Iran about, that they'll ever be allowed to do anything approaching a reasonable deal, that America will never permit that, because it's all driven by Israel. It's not about American interests or American rationality. You can make the case that, America could live with this or live with that, but they know it's not about that. It's all about Israel. And so I think there's a sort of phlegmatic sort of position where, and I agree with this, is that, it's been inevitable. A trial of strength is coming. It had to come, really, in some respect, because, there wasn't going to be an agreement. And so a trial of strength is likely, and its outcome will probably then determine whether what comes next, what will happen in the region. It's interesting, the Saudi defense ministers in Tehran today. I think they'll be having an interesting discussion. Trump is pinning everything on the Gulf. My own personal view is that he's making a big mistake, because perhaps he hasn't really understood, who are these emirs and kings and monarchs, and the degree of which, these police states don't really have quite, the heft compared with a 5,000-year-old civilization. Anyway, I mean, that's just a personal view that he's, he may find that they're not quite as strong or capable as he thinks they are. But that's his choice and his decision. And we'll see what comes out in all of this.
Well, I was just going to close out with this, that you and I both, in our experience with different government agencies and entities, there's always the public perception that there's somebody in government that actually knows what it's doing, that they've got a plan, that they're putting it into effect. And at least in my experience, I've seen that is absolutely not true. That there's always a lot of assumptions that surely somebody's looked at this, surely somebody's considered that. And it's like, no, actually they haven't. It's not till their hair is on fire that they say, does anybody have a fire extinguisher?
All right.
So
let me just finish with the last little thing that I would say to you. And I can't guarantee that this is entirely accurate. But this is, there was the message that was sent by Trump to through the Emiratis, and then the reply came back from the Omanis. But my understanding, and what I have been told, was there were 5 demands in the original message before the meeting with Withdrawal. 1, dismantling Iran's nuclear infrastructure, halting uranium enrichment, ceasing arms transfers to the Houthis, ending financial support for Hezbollah, and disbanding the popular mobilization forces in Iraq. I cannot tell you that that's authentic, but it came from Emirati views who were the ones delivering a message. But it wouldn't surprise me if that was what was actually put on writing. So it comes back, and before you close down, because you're not going to get away that easily, Larry. I'm going to put you on the spot. So the question is, quite apart from the pressures that are coming from Netanyahu, from Congress, from the institutional Jewish leadership in America, is Trump, if you like, in favor of bringing it to an end? Or, Iran, from delivering a sort of final swipe that will neutralize Iran completely? Or does he really believe his rhetoric about, I prefer to negotiate, these are fine people and I like them? What do you think?
Yeah, he's going to go to war. I think they're going to, again, they haven't thought it through. We've seen it in Yemen. The way they portrayed Yemen was, the Biden people just didn't try hard enough. They just didn't drop enough bombs. Okay, we've done more than 500 sorties now since March 15th, and have accomplished what? The Houthis are still got the Red Sea shut down. They're still firing an occasional missile into Israel, and they're defiant. And at the same time, they're shooting down predators now at a rate that surpassed anything that happened during Biden's tenure. So I don't, Trump hasn't learned a damn thing. It is, it's shocking, but I think, Witkoff is going to be on a short leash. They may even send a minder with him to make sure that he doesn't cave into any Iranian so-called demands. And the talks will break down, and then Trump's painted himself in a corner. Yeah, either they make an agreement or he's going to, bring holy hell on them.
Oh, interesting. By the way, talking about sort of, fantastical ideas, because people in Washington respect the Israelis so much, is their technical competence and their competence. I was reading that included in their plans for this attack for a week in May on Iran, they were planning to do commando raids into the nuclear sites, Israeli commando raids into the sites in Iran to destroy them. And I had to have a good laugh at that. Well, good luck with putting commandos. This isn't just sailing up the coast and doing a little quick raid in Lebanon. This is a huge country with 90 million population, and they're going to land little commando raids. I thought, talk about detached from reality.
Oh, yeah. Actually, I was involved 20 years ago scripting a counterterrorism exercise for Special Operations Forces on that exact scenario. And you're right. Yeah, it sounds good when you're sitting around the table drinking a beer talking about it, but when you get down to the actual nuts and bolts of assembling the operation, you realize, Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. Yeah, that's what this is. This is Mission Impossible. So. All right, my friend. Listen, I've kept you more than an hour. I'm always grateful for your time, but apart from
always a pleasure, Larry. Always a pleasure.
You
do such good talks.
Well, thanks. But apart from my gratitude, the people, they tune in. They love what you do. So, Conflicts Forum, is that what they search for on Substack?
Yeah. If you want to find what I've written about this thing, you can find it on Substack Conflicts Forum, which is where we put all our material. You'll also find, which is, they may be interested, we do a regular review of the Hebrew press. not the English language,
Yeah.
where you can get that, but we do a sort of summary of what's going on in the Hebrew press and Hebrew channels, which are much more radical than even the Hebrew press. But we do a sort of selection once a week. You should have a look at it too, if you can dig it out of spam. One's going, I think, later today, about what, and it gives you all the inside story of what's going on inside Israel. And you can find that on the Substack as well as the sort of occasional paper on it. It's all straightforward. I mean, it's sourced and it's taken from.
No, it's invaluable. I was going to, if you hadn't raised it, I was going to raise it. That one of the things that you and your good wife do is
it's her, not me.
Okay, so let's give Aisling the full credit. I mean, she's you know, you and I both had the same. We both married very intelligent, strong women, and but the work that she does on it in highlighting the what's said in the English press is different from what comes up in the Hebrew side of it, and so it's a great piece. So I encourage everybody to watch it.
She didn't get very far with it, but when she was in Palestine, she studied at the Hebrew University, so she, has a good sort of grasp of the atmospherics, the politics. She was in Palestine basically when she came down from Oxford and went and worked with some research organizations in Palestine, but she also went to the Hebrew University to go and learn Hebrew, and had a teacher there. I mean, she isn't capable of doing this on her own. She relies, like all of us, on sort of Google Translate and things as well. But anyway, she has the context.
Yeah. Well, listen, my friend, thanks a lot. Well, I'm sure we'll be doing this again in a couple of weeks. The world will have changed either for the better or the worse. It's not going to be. We're not going to be left in the middle wondering what's going to happen. I think we'll have a pretty clear roadmap after Saturday.
Well, we'll see, but I think it's going to be very turbulent.
All right, my friend. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye for now.
Alistair never disappoints. His knowledge, his experience, and his insights, just terrific. I hope you found them as beneficial as I did. Please hit the like and subscribe button, and we'll hopefully help this channel grow as we try to educate people about what's really going on around the world, and the prospects for war and the prospects for peace. Thanks for watching. I'm Larry Johnson, and this is Countercurrents.